The kangaroos are the first thing you learn to ignore. They graze right up to the edge of the compound, gray and unhurried, silhouetted against security fencing and the low scrub of the Tidbinbilla Valley at dusk. When I first transferred to the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex 4 years ago, I used to stop and watch them every evening on the walk from the car park to the Signal Processing Center. Now, I walk past without looking. They're part of the scenery. They belong here more than I do. My name is Ewan Marsh. I'm a signal processing specialist for NASA's Deep Space Network, posted to the Australian complex, one of 3 ground stations spaced around the planet, so that at any given moment, at least one dish can see any point in deep space. Goldstone in California, Madrid in Spain, and us, tucked into bushland 40 minutes southwest of Canberra, surrounded by nature reserve and radio quiet zones. I work the overnight shift, have for 2 years, by choice. The overnight is when the interesting work happens, because the interesting spacecraft are the ones at extreme distance. And extreme distance means long signal travel times, which means the real-time monitoring windows fall where most people don't want to be awake. I don't mind. I prefer the quiet. I prefer working with signals that have been traveling for hours before they reach me. Light-speed messages from machines older than I am, still functioning, still reporting in from the dark. There's something else about me that matters to this story. And I might as well say it now because it'll seem strange later if I don't. I'm obsessed with the Voyager Golden Record. Not casually, not in the way most people at the DSN are, where it's a nice bit of history and you mention it at outreach events. I've spent 3 years writing a paper unpublished, probably unpublishable, about the technical encoding specification etched onto the record's cover, the diagrams, the binary notation, the playback instructions designed to be understood by a civilization that shares no language with us, but does share mathematics and physics. I know the structure of that record the way a chess player knows openings. Not because anyone asked me to, because I couldn't stop. It was a Thursday in August, Southern Hemisphere winter, which at Tidbinbilla means clear skies, single-digit temperatures after sunset, and air so still you can hear the dish actuators from 200 meters away. The kind of night the engineers love. No atmospheric distortion, no moisture, just clean, cold sky and a 64,000-kilogram parabolic antenna pointed at a spot in the constellation Ophiuchus, where nothing visible exists. That's where Voyager 1 is, over 25 billion kilometers from Earth, nearly 24 hours away at light speed. That matters, remember that. I clocked in at 21:40 local time. Dani Katsaros was finishing the evening shift, and Raj Anand had already settled in at the adjacent station. For his own overnight allocation, he was tracking JWST on DSS-34, a routine data relay. The processing center isn't a large room, but with 2 of us in it, plus Dani wrapping up, it felt populated. Lived in. That's worth noting because of what came later. Dani's handover notes were on the shared terminal, nominal across the board. DSS-43, the 70-meter dish, was allocated to Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter until 2300, after which it would rotate to Voyager 1 for the remainder of the night. Standard rotation. Nothing flagged. Anything interesting? I asked. Mars Recon had a minor bit rate hiccup around 1900, but it corrected on the next pass. Nothing actionable. Oh, JPL wants an extended capture on Voyager tonight. Magnetometer thermal characterization. They sent the updated pointing sequence an hour ago. How long? Full night. Continuous lock from acquisition until Madrid picks up at their dawn window. That wasn't unusual. Voyager operations had been increasingly careful over the past year. With only two science instruments still active, the magnetometer and the plasma wave subsystem, and the radioisotope thermoelectric generators losing about 4 watts per year. Every data pass mattered. The spacecraft was running on the energetic equivalent of a dim light bulb. Engineers at JPL had been making hard choices about what to turn off and when, trying to squeeze a few more years of interstellar science from a machine launched in 1977. I logged in, acknowledged the JPL directive, confirmed the pointing sequence for DSS-43's rotation, and started my pre-acquisition checklist. Signal-to-noise thresholds, receiver calibration, bit sync parameters. Voyager transmits on X-band at 8.4 GHz with a power output of about 22 watts, roughly the energy of a refrigerator light, broadcast from a distance where the sun is just another star. By the time that signal reaches our dish, it's been attenuated to something nearly indistinguishable from the cosmic microwave background. Danny left at 2200. Raj was at his station, headphones on, doing his own work. I was doing mine. The cooling system hummed between us. At 2314, DSS-43 completed its slew and locked onto Voyager 1. Acquisition is a slow confirmation, not a dramatic event. The receiver narrows its bandwidth. The tracking loop closes. The bit sync locks. What you see on screen is a carrier signal. A steady, clean frequency line, and layered within it, the telemetry subcarrier. Data, ones and zeros, modulated onto the carrier wave, arriving at 160 bits per second. That's Voyager's voice. That's been its voice for nearly 50 years. At 2314, the lock was solid. Carrier to noise looked clean. Bit error rate was within spec. The telemetry stream started populating. Engineering frames, first internal temperatures, power bus voltage, attitude control status, then the science frames. Magnetometer readings from interstellar space. Measurements of a magnetic field environment no human instrument other than the Voyagers has ever directly sampled. I settled in. I watched the magnetometer values scroll. Consistent with recent readings. Low variance interstellar field, the faint directionality of the heliospheric current sheet's influence fading with distance. I'd memorized the expected range over 4 years of passes, 0.1 to 0.5 nanotesla, with gradual secular variation. The numbers were clean until 0.38. The magnetometer reported 1.7 nanotesla, then 0.3, then 2.1, then 0.1, then 1.9. Not noise. Noise would be scattered, irregular, degrading over time. This was oscillating, cleanly. The values were swinging between high and low states, with a regularity that looked almost mechanical. I flagged it on the shared monitoring log and said aloud, "Raj, you seeing the MAG on my V1 pass?" He rolled his chair over, looked at my screen, watched the numbers cycle. Thermal. The heater adjustments have been playing hell with the older instruments. Thermal drift wouldn't oscillate that cleanly. And the period's too short. Look, it's cycling every 40-something seconds. He watched for another minute. Could be a stuck register. The FDS is nearly 50 years old. Memory corruption could produce a looping output. The engineering frames show the FDS operating nominally. Memory checksums are clean. He shrugged. Log it and let JPL sort it out. Could be the instrument finally dying. It's been on borrowed time for years. He was right. It was a reasonable interpretation. The magnetometer had been operating continuously since 1977. Components degrade. Oscillators drift. A cyclic artifact from a failing sensor was the boring, likely explanation. But I pulled the raw data anyway, not because I was suspicious, because characterizing anomalies is my job. And the values had a structure I wanted to quantify before I wrote them off. I ran a periodicity analysis on the first hour of anomalous magnetometer data. The oscillation wasn't uniform. It wasn't a single cycle. When I decomposed the time series, there were 15 distinct amplitude patterns nested within the overall oscillation. 15 different configurations of high and low values, each lasting approximately 42 seconds, cycling in a fixed sequence before repeating. 15 distinct patterns, repeating in order. I noted this in the anomaly log. Duration, cycle count, periodicity, clean, clinical, exactly what the report template asks for. Then I sat and stared at the number 15. It meant nothing. 15 is not a physically significant number in interstellar magnetometry. It's not a harmonic. It's not a diagnostic code. The Voyager FDS doesn't have 15 state cycling modes. But it nagged at me. Not as a scientist, as the person who'd spent 3 years writing about the Golden Record. Because the Golden Record's greeting section has 55 entries, and its encoding specification divides those entries into structural groups defined by the record's playback format. And one of those groupings, the one that separates greetings by their encoding frame length, produces a subset of 15 entries that share a specific digitization parameter. I didn't pursue it. It was too absurd. I was pattern matching, the way humans do, finding signal in noise because the brain abhors randomness. 15 patterns in a failing magnetometer. 15 greetings in an encoding subset. Coincidence? I made coffee. I drank it. Raj was absorbed in his JWST relay. The screens glowed. Outside, the dish tracked. 64,000 kilograms of steel aimed at the void, faithfully recording values from a dying instrument on a spacecraft older than both of us. At 2:15, I pulled up my Golden Record encoding notes on my personal laptop. Not because I believed anything, because I couldn't sleep. And the anomaly was still cycling. And I wanted to prove to myself that the correlation was meaningless. I compared the 15 magnetometer patterns to the 15 encoding frame signatures from my notes. They matched. Not approximately, exactly. Each of the 15 amplitude patterns, when mapped to binary values using the magnetometer's own quantization resolution, produced a bit sequence identical to the encoding frame header for one of the 15 greetings. My hand stopped moving. The magnetometer wasn't malfunctioning. Something was modulating the magnetic field around Voyager 1, the actual physical environment of the spacecraft, in a pattern that precisely replicated the encoding structure of the Golden Record. The instrument was working perfectly. It was measuring what was really there. And what was really there was impossible. I need to be precise about what I was seeing, because precision is the only thing that held me together over the next several hours. And losing it now would mean losing the story. Voyager 1's magnetometer measures the ambient magnetic field along 3 axes. In interstellar space, that field is faint, the remnant influence of the heliosphere, the distant breath of other stars, the diffuse galactic field. The values are real. They correspond to a real physical environment. The instrument doesn't generate data from nothing. It reports what is outside the spacecraft. What was outside the spacecraft had changed. The magnetic field around Voyager 1 was being shaped. Not randomly, not by any natural process I could identify, but deliberately. Something was imposing structure on the interstellar medium at the spacecraft's location, creating localized magnetic configurations that the magnetometer dutifully measured and transmitted back to Earth at 160 bits per second, along with engineering data that showed every onboard system functioning normally. The entity, I'll use that word now, because I started using it then and couldn't stop, wasn't inside Voyager. It hadn't hacked the spacecraft's software or altered its hardware. It was outside, manipulating the environment that the spacecraft's instruments were designed to measure. It was writing a message in a language the magnetometer could read, the way you might write words in sand knowing that a camera overhead would photograph them. The spacecraft was just the camera. Faithful, uncomprehending, transmitting exactly what it saw. Between 2:30 and 400, I recorded the full cycling sequence 12 times, 180 complete patterns, 15 unique configurations, repeating with a precision that eliminated any natural explanation I could construct. I ran statistical tests for randomness, autocorrelation, spectral leakage, instrumental artifact generation, everything in the signal processing toolkit. Every test confirmed the same thing. The data was structured, non-random, externally sourced, and consistent with deliberate encoding. I did not sleep. I did not leave my station. Raj finished his JWST pass at 3:30 and asked if I was all right. I told him the magnetometer anomaly was interesting. He glanced at my screen, saw numbers that looked like numbers, and went to the break room. At 4 o'clock, I laid out the 15 patterns on paper. I'm a signal processing specialist. I work in digital environments. But some things need to be physical need to exist in a space where you can touch them and move them and see them all at once without scrolling. 15 columns. Each column contained the binary sequence derived from one magnetometer amplitude pattern. Each sequence matched a golden record greeting frame header. And the frame headers weren't arbitrary selections from the record. They corresponded to specific greetings. I mapped them. Positions 1, 5, 11, 14, 17, 22, 25, 29, 33, 36, 40, 44, 47, 51, and 55 from the record's greeting sequence. Akkadian, Bengali, Greek, Hindi, Indonesian, Korean, Latin, Mandarin Chinese, Nguni, Oriya, Punjabi, Serbian, Telugu, Urdu, Wu. I stared at the list, rearranged it by geography, by language family, by date of recording, no pattern, no obvious selection criterion. Then I looked at the actual greetings, not the languages, the content, what each message actually said. Akkadian, may all be very well. Bengali, hello, let there be peace everywhere. Greek, greetings to you, whoever you are. We come in friendship to those who are friends. Hindi, greetings from the inhabitants of this world. Korean, how are you? The 15 selected greetings were the ones with propositional content, statements about identity, declarations of intent, questions, invitations, the ones that said something beyond a simple salutation. The 40 that were absent, the ones without matching magnetometer patterns, were the purely phatic greetings. Good health. Best wishes. Hello from the children of planet Earth. Whatever was shaping the magnetic field around Voyager 1 hadn't just decoded the golden record's encoding specification. It had parsed 55 messages in 55 human languages, evaluated each for semantic content, and selected only the ones that made a claim or asked a question. It understood us, not our format, not our binary, our meaning. I told Raj at 4:20, not because I wanted to, because I needed a witness, and more than that, I needed someone to tell me I was wrong. I showed him the 15 patterns. I showed him the golden record correlation. I showed him the selection principle. He looked at it for a long time. He's a careful person, methodical, not prone to excitement or to dismissing things he can't explain. The encoding frame headers, he said. You're certain about the match? I verified each one against the published specification. It's exact. And the selection, you're saying whatever is generating this read the actual linguistic content of 55 recordings in 55 different languages and decided which ones were substantive. That's what the data shows. He was quiet for nearly a minute. Then he said, Ewan, this is either the most extraordinary instrument failure in the history of space exploration, or it's not an instrument failure. I know. You need to escalate this. I know. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. We were both professionals, and the protocol for an unexplained anomaly of this magnitude was clear. Notify the shift supervisor, notify JPL, document everything. I called Martin Hale at home. It was 4:35. He answered on the fourth ring, groggy and irritated. And I described the anomaly as carefully as I could. Magnetometer readings showing structured, non-natural periodicity. 15 distinct patterns correlating with the Voyager Golden Record's greeting encoding specification. Selection principle based on semantic content of the original messages. There was a silence. Ewan, are you telling me you think something is writing messages in the magnetic field around Voyager 1? I'm telling you the data is structured, non-random, and correlates precisely with a known encoding format that exists on the spacecraft. I'm not offering an interpretation. I'm reporting what I've measured. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't touch anything. Keep recording. I kept recording. I had been recording for 5 hours. The 15 patterns cycled on, steady and patient, as if they had been cycling for a very long time and would continue for as long as it took. Martin arrived at 5:20. Raj was still at his station. The three of us stood at my screen and watched the magnetometer values cycle. Martin is an engineer. He spent 20 minutes running his own diagnostics: receiver chain integrity, Doppler correction accuracy, bit sync stability. Everything was clean. The signal from Voyager was pristine. The engineering telemetry was nominal. The spacecraft was functioning exactly as designed. The magnetometer was reporting real measurements of a real magnetic field that happened to contain structured, meaningful, impossible patterns. We need JPL, he said. He made the call at 05:45 to Patricia Ewan, the Voyager Mission Operations Manager on duty. I'd spoken to her dozens of times over the years about routine matters: pointing adjustments, bit rate confirmations, scheduling conflicts. Martin put her on speaker. He described the anomaly. He shared the screen data through the JPL remote monitoring link. He walked her through the 15 patterns and, at my prompting, explained the golden record correlation. There was a long pause. I could hear typing. I'm looking at your raw telemetry feed, she said. The primary data is clean. Engineering frames nominal. But the magnetometer values, I can see the periodicity. Let me pull this up on our end and run an independent spectral analysis. Patricia, I said, check the 15 patterns against the greeting encoding specification from the Golden Record cover diagram. Positions 1, 5, 11, 14, 17, 22, 25, 29, 33, 36, 40, 44, 47, 51, and 55. Another pause. Longer. How did you know that? I've been studying the record's encoding structure for 3 years. It's a personal project. Your personal project may have just become professionally relevant. Give me an hour. I'm assembling a team. By 700, the processing center had 5 people in it: Martin, Raj, myself, and 2 engineers from the facility's antenna systems team, whom Martin had called in. JPL had an open video link running. Patricia Yuen was on screen with 3 others, a telemetry engineer, a mission analyst, and someone I didn't recognize who was introduced only as Dr. Weil from the Science Directorate. I walked them through everything. The full dataset, the periodicity analysis, the 15-pattern structure, the golden record correlation, the semantic selection principle. Nobody laughed. Nobody told me I was seeing things. The data was there, verified independently by every system in the chain. The question wasn't whether the patterns existed, it was what they meant. The patterns are frame headers, Dr. Weil said. He was calm in a way that I found either reassuring or disturbing. I couldn't decide which. Identification markers. They're telling us which greetings they've selected. But is there content beyond the headers? Are there actual responses, or just an indication that the greetings were received? I hadn't gone further. I'd been rigorous. I'd characterized the anomaly and escalated it. But the question cracked something open in me, because I'd been avoiding it for 3 hours, avoiding the possibility that there was more in the data than I'd already found. The magnetometer values have more resolution than I've been using, I said. I've been looking at the amplitude envelope, the overall pattern of highs and lows. But each measurement is a 3-axis vector. If the information is encoded in the full vector space, not just the magnitude, the data density is significantly higher. How much higher? Enough to contain a 6,960-bit payload per cycle, per greeting. The number came out of my mouth before I'd fully computed it, and I realized as I said it that 6,960 bits was the exact block size you'd get if you digitized 1 golden record greeting, according to the encoding specification printed on the record's cover. Dr. Weil leaned forward. "Decode it," he said. "The first greeting in the golden record sequence is Akkadian, an ancient Mesopotamian language dead for over 2,000 years. The speaker was a researcher at Cornell. The message translated, 'May all be very well.' I decoded the full vector data for pattern 1, position 1 in the sequence, Akkadian with Patricia's team watching in real time from JPL. The 6,960-bit block divided into 2 sub-blocks. The first was short, 232 bits. When I decompressed it, using a lossless method I didn't recognize, but could verify it matched the known Akkadian recording exactly, bit for bit. A perfect replica of what we'd sent, stored as a reference. The "you said this" portion. The second sub-block was the response. Its encoding was different, denser, not audio, not any format I recognized. But it was structured hierarchically nested, with internal markers and relational elements that described connections between concepts rather than the concepts themselves. A topology, a web of relationships. I couldn't read it fluently, but I could see the shape. The Akkadian greeting, "May all be very well," had been answered with something that referenced the concept of well-being and expanded on it. The response seemed to ask, by what standard? Well, relative to what? The original greeting assumed a shared understanding of what well means, and the response was noting, gently, that this assumption was unearned. I moved to position 11, Greek. "Greetings to you, whoever you are. We come in friendship to those who are friends." The response was longer, more complex, and when I mapped its relational structure, my hands stopped moving. 3 propositions in the original greeting, 3 response elements. The first addressed whoever you are, a mutual acknowledgement of ignorance. We also do not know who you are. The second addressed we come in friendship. Your intent is noted but cannot be verified at this distance. The third addressed the conditionality to those who are friends and reframed it as a question. How do you determine friendship? The room was silent. 5 people at Tidbinbilla, 4 on screen from JPL. All of us staring at a decoded structure that said, unmistakably, you offered a tautology. We're friendly to friends. And something 25 billion kilometers away had pointed out, with what felt almost like patience, that this tells you nothing. That circularity is not a criterion, that the species which sent this message was unable or unwilling to articulate what, specifically, it means to be a friend. Patricia Ewan's voice from the screen was barely above a whisper. It's critiquing our logic. It's asking for clarification, I said. There's a difference. But I wasn't sure there was. Over the next 2 hours, with JPL running parallel decoding and cross-checking our work, we opened 9 of the 15 responses. Each followed the same structure, a compressed reference to the original greeting, followed by a relational response that engaged with the semantic content. The Bengali response, "Hello, let there be peace everywhere," was answered with what appeared to be a query about the scope of everywhere, whether the speaker meant a physical region or a conceptual state, whether peace, as described, was aspirational or descriptive. The Hindi response, "Greetings from the inhabitants of this world," generated a response focused on the word inhabitants. The relational structure suggested a distinction being drawn between inhabiting a world and originating from it. As if the responder understood that these were not the same thing and wanted to know which we meant. Every response was like this: precise, engaged, probing, not hostile, not dismissive. The tone, insofar as a relational topology can have tone, was that of a careful reader encountering a text for the first time and marking the passages that required further discussion. It had read our message the way a thoughtful person reads a letter from a stranger, with attention, with interest, and with a clear awareness of everything the letter failed to say. Dr. Weil, on the JPL link, said something I've thought about every day since. It's not just intelligent, it's literate. There's a difference between processing language and reading it. Processing finds patterns. Reading finds gaps. And this thing had found every gap we'd left. At 0930 Canberra time, Earth's rotation carried Voyager 1 out of our sky and into Goldstone's. The Goldstone complex in California acquired the carrier signal at their 1430 local, and within minutes, their telemetry feed was live on the shared JPL link. The magnetometer anomaly was present. Same structured patterns, same 15-cycle periodicity. Goldstone confirmed independently what we'd been watching for 10 hours. But there was something else. Goldstone's data contained additional patterns. Not 15 cycles, 22. 7 new greeting positions had appeared to positions that hadn't been present during Canberra's window. The entity had added content when the listening station changed. I felt something cold move through me. "It knows," I said. Patricia looked up. "What?" "It knows the dish rotated. It knows a different station is listening, and it's giving them different data." The 7 new greeting positions were 3, 8, 19, 27, 31, 38, and 49. Arabic, Burmese, Gujarati, Marathi, Nepali, Romanian, Turkish. All substantive greetings, all containing propositional content, but a different selection than the 15 we'd received. No single station was getting the complete picture. The entity was distributing its message across the DSN rotation. pacing its disclosure to match the planetary geometry of our listening network. It knew how we listened. It knew when each station could hear. And it was choosing what to reveal based on who was receiving. The data from Goldstone's new 7 positions began decoding. The responses followed the same structure: compressed original, relational reply, probing questions. But among them was something that stopped every voice in every room on 2 continents. Position 22, Korean. The original greeting on the golden record is brief. 2 words in translation. How are you? The response was the shortest of all. A single, undivided block. No relational branching. No nested elements. 1 statement. I decoded it with the team watching. The room at Tidbin Billa was crowded now. Martin, Raj, 2 antenna engineers, a facility director who'd been called in, and 4 faces on the JPL screen. Nobody spoke while I worked. The response to "How are you?" did not answer the question. Not directly. It described a state of waiting, not passive, active. The kind that requires sustained energy, sustained attention, sustained existence across a span of time that the relational markers described, using the same scaling system as the date headers in the packet framing. I ran the numbers 3 times because the first 2 answers seemed wrong. The duration being described was on the order of 200 million years. Something had been waiting, actively, attending, for longer than mammals have existed on Earth. And when a small gold disc arrived, carrying a message that asked, "How are you?" in Korean, the answer was, "I am here. I have been here. I have been here for a very long time, and I am still here, and you are the first to ask." Raj, standing behind me, put his hand on the back of my chair. I think he was steadying himself. Nobody in the room said anything. The facility director sat down heavily in a chair that wasn't his. On the screen, Patricia Yuen removed her glasses and pressed her fingers against her eyes. The magnetometer values continued to cycle, patient, steady, as they had been, apparently for longer than we could meaningfully comprehend, waiting for an instrument capable of measuring them to arrive within range. How are you? I am still here. Madrid acquired Voyager 1 at 06:15 local Spanish time, 15:15 Canberra, 22:15 at Goldstone. The full rotation, 3 stations, 3 continents, each seeing the spacecraft in turn as the Earth presented its dishes to the dark. Madrid's data contained 31 greeting positions, the original 15 from Canberra, the 7 new ones from Goldstone, and 9 more that neither station had received. The entity was continuing to distribute. 31 of 55 greetings now had responses. Each new position followed the same structure. Each response engaged with the semantic content of the original. Each one asked questions we hadn't anticipated. I had been awake for 18 hours. I was operating on coffee and something that felt biochemically adjacent to terror, but wasn't terror. It was proximity to something too large to fit inside the emotional vocabulary I possessed. And then, in Madrid's data stream, the count changed. Not 31, 32. A new pair had appeared, a 56th entry. The reference sub-block, the "You said this" portion, didn't contain a compressed version of any golden record greeting. It contained something new. Positional data, a mathematical description of 2 locations, one consistent with Voyager 1's current interstellar coordinates, and one consistent with Earth's current orbital position relative to the Sun. A map. Here is where I am. Here is where you are. And the response, the second sub-block, was the longest and most complex of any we'd decoded. layers of relational structure nested so deeply that our tools could only penetrate the outermost shell. I worked on it with JPL for 2 hours. We decoded the outer layer together, passing data back and forth, building a shared understanding of the vocabulary the entity had been teaching us all night. The outer layer contained 4 reference elements. The first pointed to the Golden Record's audio content, the music, the sounds of Earth, the whale songs. The second referenced the greeting structure, the 55 languages, the diversity. The third referenced the images, the 115 photographs of life on Earth. The fourth referenced the pulsar map on the record's cover, the galactic position of our sun. And around all 4, enclosing them, was a question. Not ambiguous, not cryptic, structurally clear, even through the imperfect lens of our decoding. Why did you send it? Within an hour of the 56th message being decoded, the signal changed again. The cycling patterns didn't stop. The 32 greeting responses continued to transmit, steady and repeating, through whatever station had line of sight. But a new layer appeared in the data. Not more responses. Something else. The entity began transmitting structural frames with no content. Empty containers. Relational skeletons with placeholder markers where data should be. Headers without bodies. Questions without answers. It took us 40 minutes to understand what we were looking at. "It's a reply format," I said. I was standing at a whiteboard in the portable building that had been set up in the maintenance yard. The facility had outgrown the processing center. And Tidbinbilla now had a dozen people on site from 3 agencies. "It's building a template for us." The empty frames used the same relational vocabulary the entity had been teaching us all night. The same topology, the same hierarchical nesting. But where the entity's messages were filled dense with content, layered with meaning, these frames were hollow, waiting. Input fields. A blank form. Dr. Weil, now physically present via a military flight that had landed at Fairbairn an hour earlier, studied the whiteboard. "It's handing us a shared language and asking us to use it." "Not just asking," Patricia said from the video link. "Look at the framing. The empty structures correspond to the 4 elements of the 56th message. Music, greetings, images, pulsar map. It's asking us to explain each component of the Golden Record. Why the music? Why the greetings? Why the photographs? Why the map? Why did you send it?" Broken into 4 parts. Each part a specific question, each given its own space for our answer. The entity had built a language out of our own greetings, used that language to ask us a question, and then built us a form to reply in using the same language, the same structure, the same mathematical relationships, so that we couldn't misunderstand what was being asked, and so that our answer would be unambiguous. It was, I realized, an act of extraordinary courtesy. It had done all the work, learned our messages, built the bridge, framed the question, provided the format. All we had to do was answer. The argument started at 1900 Canberra time. I had been awake for 22 hours. The room was full NASA officials, Australian Signals Directorate observers, 2 people from the Department of Defense who hadn't spoken once, Patricia and Dr. Weil, and a growing team of linguists and mathematicians who'd been brought in as the scope of the decoding became clear. The question on the table was simple. Do we respond? Voyager 1's uplink capability still functioned. We could transmit a command to the spacecraft. It would take nearly 24 hours to arrive, but the spacecraft could receive it. In theory, we could encode a reply using the entity's own format and send it through Voyager's communication system. In theory. "We have no protocol for this," said the Department of Defense representative, speaking for the first time. A woman with short gray hair and a voice calibrated for rooms where people disagree. There is no framework, no mandate, and no authorized decision-maker for initiating communication with a non-human intelligence. This requires governmental consultation at the highest levels, and that process takes time. The entity is asking now, I said. It built a reply format. It's waiting for input. Every hour we don't respond is a data point. Every hour we spend deliberating is prudent. Every hour of silence is also an answer. We're already communicating. The only question is whether we do it deliberately or accidentally. Dr. Wiles spoke. Mr. Marsh is correct that silence carries information. The entity has demonstrated sophisticated interpretive capabilities. It parsed the semantic content of 55 human languages. It will certainly parse the semantics of a non-response. That's speculation. It's inference, based on observed capability. The argument went in circles. Not because anyone was wrong, because the situation was genuinely unprecedented, and every cautious impulse was justified, and every urgent impulse was also justified, and there was no framework for resolving the two. I understood the hesitation. I did. Who speaks for Earth? Carl Sagan and his team had answered that question in 1977 by simply doing it, assembling the record, choosing the greetings, selecting the music, bolting it to the spacecraft. No vote, no committee, no global consultation. They spoke for Earth because no one stopped them, and because their message was generous, and because there wasn't time to ask permission. We had time now, and the time was paralyzing us. The golden record was a public message, I said, sent on behalf of humanity, not classified, not restricted. It said, to whoever is listening, we are here. This is who we are. We want to know you. And now someone is listening, and they're asking why. And we're sitting in a room debating whether we're authorized to explain our own intentions. Nobody responded immediately. The silence in the room was heavy with the specific weight of people who know they're inside a moment that will be either remembered or regretted. Patricia Ewan said quietly from the screen, "What would we even say?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. The empty frames continued transmitting for 11 hours. I know because I watched them. I sat in the portable building at Tidbinbilla through the night, through Madrid's window and back to Goldston and back to us again, watching the entities reply, template repeat. The same hollow structures, the same patient placeholders, the same open spaces where our answer was supposed to go. No answer was sent. Not because it was forbidden, no one explicitly prohibited a response. It simply didn't happen. The deliberation continued. Committees were convened. Draft responses were written and rejected and rewritten and tabled. Linguists argued about format. Diplomats argued about content. Military advisors argued about security implications. Everyone argued about authority. And the signal began to change. At 600 Canberra time, roughly 30 hours after I'd first detected the anomaly, the greeting responses began simplifying. The relational density decreased. The nested structures flattened. The responses became shorter, less detailed, less engaged. By 800, the empty reply frames had stopped transmitting. By 1000, the greeting responses had reduced from 32 back to 15. The same original 15 I'd detected on the first pass, as if the entity were rewinding, contracting, folding inward. I sat with Dr. Weil and watched it happen. "It's concluding," he said. "It asked a question and we didn't answer. We couldn't answer. Is there a difference from its perspective?" He didn't reply. The entity had spent what appeared to be decades, or centuries, or longer, decoding our message, constructing a shared language, formulating precise questions, and building a response framework so accommodating that a child could have used it. It had done everything within its power to make communication possible. It had, through a 49-year-old transmitter running on 22 watts, reached across 25 billion kilometers and said, "I heard you, I understood you, now talk to me." And we'd said nothing. Not because we didn't want to, because we couldn't agree on what to say. And in the absence of agreement, silence was the default. The same silence that fills every committee room where the stakes are high enough that no one wants to speak first. I watched the signal simplify. It felt less like a machine adjusting parameters, and more like someone setting down a phone they've held to their ear for a very long time, listening to ringing that no one ever answered. In the hours while the signal contracted, I stood at the whiteboard in the portable building and talked. Not to convince anyone, not to make an argument, just to say aloud what I'd been thinking. Because the room was full of people, and the silence between us felt like it needed to be broken by something honest. "We talk about the golden record as a greeting card," I said. "Sagan's beautiful gesture, and it is. But it's also something else." I wrote on the whiteboard, 115 images, a map of the solar system with Earth's position marked, diagrams of human DNA, photographs of our bodies, our cities, our agriculture, acoustic recordings of our weather, our animals, our vehicles, a pulsar map giving the precise galactic position of our sun relative to 14 known pulsars, designed to remain accurate for hundreds of millions of years. We didn't just say hello. We provided a complete description of what we are and where we live. We gave directions to our front door, and we included photographs of the door. Dr. Weil was listening. Patricia was on screen, listening. The defense officials were listening. "Sagan's team did this out of love," I said, "out of optimism, out of the belief that any civilization capable of finding Voyager in interstellar space would be advanced enough to be benevolent. That belief is beautiful. It's also an assumption made on behalf of 8 billion people, none of whom were consulted." I put the marker down. And now the assumption is being tested. Something found the record. Something decoded it, not just the format, but the content. It read our message. It understood it. And it asked us a single question. Why? Why did you send this? Why did you describe yourself so completely to the unknown? I looked at the room, at the faces, at the screens. And we don't know. We've spent 30 hours trying to compose a response, and we can't, because we don't actually know why we sent it. Was it loneliness? Was it hope? Was it fear? Was it vanity? The record doesn't say. Sagan didn't say. We said hello in 55 languages and provided a map to our solar system and never articulated to ourselves or to anyone what we wanted to happen if someone followed the map. The room was quiet. The signal was contracting on every screen. The 15 remaining greeting responses were cycling slower now, with longer pauses between groups. The entity asked us to explain ourselves. And the honest answer, the one no committee will ever draft and no government will ever send, is that we can't. We sent a message to the universe, and we don't know why. At 1400 Canberra time, approximately 38 hours after the anomaly first appeared, the signal entered its final phase. The 15 greeting responses stopped cycling. In their place, a single, continuous transmission. Not structured in the familiar 15-packet format. A new format, dense, sustained, running for 12 minutes before it completed and did not repeat. It took the JPL team and our on-site analysts 4 hours to decode it. I sat with them and worked, running on something beyond caffeine, beyond adrenaline, beyond any physiological state I can name. The message was a summary. The entity described what it had learned about us, not from the golden record alone, from the golden record and from our response, from the totality of what we'd said and what we hadn't. The summary was precise, and it was devastating in its clarity. A species that communicates across its own world in thousands of languages but cannot compose a single message when the audience is not itself. A species that sends a comprehensive self-portrait into the unknown location, biology, culture, music, longing, but cannot articulate the purpose of the sending when asked. A species that says, "We come in friendship to those who are friends," but when asked to define friendship, falls silent. A species whose most profound message to the universe is, upon examination, a question it never realized it was asking. Is anyone there? And when the answer is yes, the species discovers it has nothing to say next. Not a condemnation. There was nothing hostile in the structure, nothing mocking, nothing contemptuous. The tone was, and I struggle with this word, because topology doesn't have tone. But I'm a human, and I can't help hearing it. The tone was compassionate, as if the entity understood that our silence wasn't refusal. It was incapacity. We genuinely didn't know what to say. And the entity recognized this as a true thing about us, a feature of our species as real and measurable as our DNA or our cities or our music. It had learned something about us that we hadn't known about ourselves. We are a species that reaches out, compulsively, hopefully, beautifully, and we have no idea why. The final transmission was brief, less than a minute of data. When we decoded it, the content was familiar, not new, not a final question or statement. It was the golden record's encoding specification, the playback instructions from the record's cover, the diagrams, the binary notation, the timing data, the spatial positioning, all of it, reproduced exactly as we had etched it into aluminum and gold nearly 50 years ago. Our own instructions returned to us, unmodified, unaltered, exact. As if to say, I followed these. I did everything your instructions described. I decoded your record. I listened to your music. I looked at your images. I read your greetings. I learned your languages. I understood your message. And then I asked you a question, using a language I built from the tools you gave me, in a format I designed to be as clear as I could make it. The failure of understanding was not mine. I stared at the decoded output on my screen. Around me, people were talking, analyzing, interpreting, documenting. But I couldn't hear them. I was listening to something underneath the noise. A silence that was already forming, the shape of what was about to happen. I checked the magnetometer feed. The values were changing. The structured patterns were dissolving. The 15 distinct configurations are blurring, flattening, losing their edges, like a tide going out. It's ending, I said. Dr. Weil looked at the screen, at the values, at the topology collapsing into simplicity. Yes, he said, I think it is. At 1847 Canberra time, August 23rd, 2026, the magnetometer readings from Voyager 1 returned to normal. Interstellar magnetic field, 0.3 nanotesla, low variance, consistent with the local interstellar medium. The same values we'd been tracking for years, clean, quiet, real. The plasma wave subsystem, nominal. Background plasma frequency consistent with the known density of the very local interstellar medium. No oscillation, no anomaly. Engineering telemetry. Power bus at 216.1 watts. Attitude control locked. High gain antenna pointed at Earth. Transmitter temperature normal. Everything was as it should be, as it had been for decades before this shift, as if nothing had happened. The portable building went quiet, not the productive quiet of people working, the hollow quiet of people who understand that something has ended and cannot be recovered. 23 people on 3 continents, staring at screens showing nominal telemetry from a 49-year-old spacecraft, knowing that nominal was the worst thing the screens could possibly show. I sat in my chair. My knees ached. My eyes burned. I'd been awake for over 40 hours. Outside the portable building, the Tidbinbilla Valley was dark again. Another southern hemisphere winter evening. Cold air, eucalyptus, the faint hum of DSS-43 adjusting its tracking. The kangaroos would be out there on the hillside, gray shapes against the scrub, unhurried. I thought about Carl Sagan, about the team at Cornell in 1977, working against a launch deadline, choosing music and greetings and photographs to represent a species they loved, assembling a portrait of Earth with care and tenderness, and the absolute conviction that it was worth sending, that the gesture mattered, that saying, "We are here," into the dark was inherently good, even if no one ever heard it. Someone heard it, and they understood it better perhaps than we did. They understood that we were reaching out without knowing why, and they asked us to examine that impulse, and we couldn't, not because the answer didn't exist, because we'd never looked for it. We'd been so focused on the sending that we'd never asked ourselves why we wanted to send. The signal was gone. The magnetometer measured nothing but the thin, real, indifferent magnetic field of interstellar space. Voyager 1 continued on its trajectory, moving at 17 kilometers per second toward the constellation Ophiuchus, carrying a gold disk that still said hello in 55 languages to a universe that had briefly said hello back and heard nothing in return. I logged out of my terminal. I stood up. Martin was by the door, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Go home, Ewan," he said. "Get some sleep." I walked to the car park. The air was sharp and cold and smelled like eucalyptus and distance. I could hear the dish above the tree line, tracking, following Voyager's faint signal across the sky. Still listening, still pointed at the dark. I got in my car. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Then I drove home through the valley, past the nature reserve and the radio quiet zone, under a sky full of stars that looked exactly the same as they had 2 nights ago, and would look exactly the same tomorrow, and the night after that. Indifferent and permanent, and full of distances that meant nothing to them and everything to us. The golden record is still out there, still traveling, still carrying its message. I just wish we'd known what we were trying to say.